Hey guys, Kevin with Mix Coach here. I had just a quick observation, something I've noticed here lately about mixers. A lot of new mixers, when they get their DAW, they get a mix, they get the files imported, they work really hard on EQing drums, getting the vocal to sound just right, stuff that we all do. But then where they go wrong is they consider that the mix. That's not really the mix, that's the setup to the mix in most cases. While you do need to polish the sound of vocals, of drums, etc., the mix happens when you dynamically ride the fader and make the whatever you're mixing, whether it be the vocal, let's say vocal in this case, when you make it sit in the mix. Now, I teach certain ways of making a vocal sit in the mix in the studio, and that is to mix in mono, mix at low volumes, and make sure that your phase is right, because that makes a difference too. But in the end, what you have to do is you have to ride the fader. You have to make sure that the dynamics of the vocal are going with the dynamics of the music, so that the vocal doesn't pop out and get too loud, then it doesn't get lost. Now, this also applies to live mixing, and I've noticed as I train volunteers to do live mixing, one of the things that I've noticed is that some mixers, they will set up the mix, get everything to sound good, and then they'll take their hands off the fader, just kind of cross their arms and listen. Now, that may work for a brief moment in time, but for the most part, what you've got there is a snapshot in time. And when I noticed this was that, and we all tend to do this, and it does work sometimes. But you can, like, let's say the pastor is speaking for half an hour. You can just leave his fader alone. But he's going to get excited about something he's saying, and he's going to get louder, and he's going to try to make a point, and he's going to start talking really soft like I'm talking now, and it's going to draw people in. And then when he starts to talk loud, it's going to be dynamic. Now, what a lot of people do is they'll try to compress it, and I've even been guilty of this, even as I was thinking about how do we correct this problem of dynamics in the worship center. I said, well, we just need to tighten down on the limiter, on the compressor. But that's not really ideal, and that's not really mixing. I mean, mixing is, kind of anticipating when he's going to get loud, when he's going to get soft, and actually riding the volume. And what I found is that in the worship center, in our worship center, 65 to 70 dB is ideal, is optimal for that. And as I was able to sit in the audience this past Sunday, I noticed that, being the nerd I am, I was reading my VU meter, and I was thinking that feels a little too loud there, and I would look, and it would be 70 dB or so. Then when I started thinking, when it's like, mixing is like let's compare it to running a camera. Now, if you were running a camera on the pastor, and he moves from side to side on the stage, sure, you could clamp the camera down to where it would capture him on the stage as far as he moves. But the problem would be it would be a wide shot, and you wouldn't get any detail when he's trying to make his point. You wouldn't get the close-up view of his face, because you'd be zoomed out, because that's where you would leave the camera. Any good video production or camera operator knows that you pretty much have to follow him with the camera all the time, because you want to get ahead to a waist shot or a close-up shot. So, riding the vocal is a lot like moving the camera. You wouldn't, a good camera person, you wouldn't let them, zoom out to a good safe shot and say, we'll just let the person zoom in on YouTube or whatever. You wouldn't do that, because that's not good camera operation, and it's not good production. And neither is letting the compressor do all the work, and even worse, just leaving the fader in one position and then leaving, because the pastor has these dynamic moments that we need to be able to contain, so to where they meet, criteria of, in a worship center, and my, as I train my people, 65 to 70 dB, and as you're mixing a record, it would be what, minus 15 LUFS. I'm taking a guess at that. I haven't really mapped out exactly what I like to hear on spoken word, but you know what I'm saying. You wouldn't just leave it alone, especially if the pastor was a dynamic pastor. Now, of course, you do have people who speak, who tend to speak in monotone. They never get excited about anything, and they speak monotone all the time. Those people don't usually have large audiences unless they are just profound in everything they're saying. Most people, like what I'm doing right now, when I get excited about a certain thing I'm talking about, I tend to talk a little louder. So anyway, that's just an observation I had this weekend about mixing in general. When you're mixing vocals in a music, when you're mixing in the studio or in live, even if you're writing or mixing vocals when there's nothing else, say the spoken word or a sermon or something like that, you still, in order to be a good mixer, you still have to keep your hands on the steering wheel. I mean, if I can draw one more example, it would be like you're driving down the road and you get the coordinates and you got a straight road ahead of you, and you just set your wheel and you just let go of the wheel and you start talking to someone else. It's not going to be long until you're going to hear a loud noise, either of you running off the road or something like that. So you wouldn't drive that way, and when you mix, you shouldn't mix that way either. So anyway, that's just some thoughts I had about writing vocals and getting really good mixes, whether there be on stage or in the studio. So I hope that helps. Talk to you soon.